If you're a young person struggling to find a decent job in this horrible economy, you're definitely familiar with LinkedIn, a website that's probably the bane of your existence at this point. So, what if I told you that the co-founder of LinkedIn himself, Reid Hoffman, recently made headlines when he predicted that by 2034, traditional 9-to-5 jobs will become extinct? And even more recently, a report came out that AI has already today replaced 14% of jobs. This isn't a futuristic sci-fi dystopia anymore. This is already happening in front of our very eyes as we speak. The 9-to-5 jobs we already hate so much are rapidly dying out, and it's time we figure out a way to evolve beyond them. Evolution and survival of the fittest arguments have always been used to justify why we should be forced to get a career and why we deserve to just starve to death if we can't get a job. You hear delusional boomers regurgitating this nonsense all the time. Hey, it's not anything that's wrong with the system. This is just how evolution works. The strong survive and the weak get weeded out of existence. You see it all the time, even in nature. Now, like every delusional boomer argument, there's so much hilariously wrong with this logic, I don't even know where to start. First of all, boomers themselves would never survive via the laws of nature. In the animal kingdom, when an animal gets too old, he sadly just gets kicked off his territory by a younger competitor and eventually dies of exposure. He doesn't get to sit around in a comfortable house collecting social security. The old and weak are always the first to get weeded out in the process of natural selection. Yeah, I highly doubt boomers will bring this up when they use evolution to justify why you should be forced to work for their dogshit wages. But let's put all that aside just for this video. For just the next 15 minutes or so, let's purely live by the laws of natural selection and survival of the fittest. You see, one thing these delusional boomers and corporate shills seem to forget is that if the laws of nature are just an inevitable part of life, then the very concept of a 9-to-5 job itself isn't exempt from this either. Work, jobs, and careers themselves can go extinct too. It's genetics weeded out by a better, superior system. And it appears Gen Z might just be evolving towards that right now as we speak. So, a lot of you guys have been asking me to list the names of the games I play in the background, as they look really fun to play and you guys understandably want to try them out yourselves. Well, I've decided to go a step and beyond even just that. I've partnered up with the sponsor of today's video, Instant Gaming, so that not only can you play all the games you see in my videos, you can get them on awesome, significant discounts. The game we're playing in today's video is Revenge of the Savage Planet. If this game looks fun to you and you want to try it out, you can get it on Instant Gaming right now for an incredible 38% off. Instant Gaming isn't just another gaming marketplace. Every game is sold directly from authorized resellers, and it's a totally legitimate platform with a near perfect rating from over 700,000 reviews on Trustpilot. So, if you want to try out Revenge of the Savage Planet or any of the other countless trending games they have on huge discounts, including the early Game of the Year contender Clair Obscur Expedition 33, click on the link in the description and the pinned comment. Along with getting a great game on a huge discount, you'll be doing me a huge favor in helping to support the channel as well. And now, back to the video. Why is it so hard to imagine a life without a so-called traditional 9-to-5? A life beyond the miserable daily grind of clocking in and clocking out every day for a paycheck? Well, part of the reason is that at least in our lifetimes, this is all we've known. We simply haven't seen alternative systems, so we just quietly accept that this is just the way things are. But that's the thing. This is all we've known and observed in our lifetimes. But our lifetimes are a very small blip on the radar in comparison to the vast expanse of human history. And when we extend our scope beyond our limited 20 or 30-year perspectives, a whole new world opens up. Once you see that society has existed and thrived for thousands of years before 9-to-5 jobs, you now unlock your mind to the possibility that it could exist and thrive in a post 9-to-5 world as well. A traditional 9-to-5 job is called traditional because that's all we've known. But in reality, it's actually anything but traditional. When I think of tradition, I think of customs or ways of life that have been around for thousands of years. Marriage is a tradition. It's been around for thousands of years. Christmas is a tradition. It's been around for thousands of years. And with how normalized 9-to-5 jobs are, you probably think that they too have been around for thousands of years. But the reality is that 9-to-5 jobs haven't been around for 1,000 years. They haven't even been around for 100 years. The modern standard of 9-to-5 work was established in 1926 when Henry Ford first introduced a 40-hour, 5-day work week. So now you know, the concept of a 9-to-5 job is actually a very recent development relative to the 10,000 years of recorded human history. So, what was work like before that? Well, for about 150 years before that, during the Industrial Revolution, working conditions were at their absolute worst. People were forced to work 12 hours a day in god-awful factory conditions for terrible low wages. And corporate chills will often use this to justify why modern-day 9-to-5 jobs are so good. Hey, you should be grateful you're working for $7 an hour at McDonald's. You could be toiling away in a dangerous factory right now. But the problem is, even the Industrial Revolution is very recent by historical standards. What happens when you ask the question, what were jobs like before that? Well, this is where things get very interesting. We often think that because we have better technology today, our working conditions must be better as well. But in many aspects, the exact opposite is true. Technology has been used to enslave and exploit us as much as it's been used to uplift us. Perhaps the best example of this is electricity and artificial lighting. Prior to the invention of artificial lighting, there was a biological hard cap limit on how much one could work. When the sun went down, you had no light, no ability to see, and it was physically impossible to work even if you wanted to. Not only did this limit the amount of hours in a day you could work, it also limited the amount of days in a year you could work. During dark winter months when the sun sets very early, people were essentially forced to take extended 3-month Christmas vacations, whether they wanted to or not. This was further compounded by the fact that almost all work was agricultural work back then, and it was impossible to do farm work when the ground was frozen solid. I've made a bunch of historical videos comparing work from previous pre-industrial eras to our modern soulless 9-to-5 prison, and perhaps the most stunning discovery I made is that almost every society in human history, regardless of culture, location, or era, followed this exact same pattern of work. Ancient Roman slaves had anywhere between 100 to 130 days of holiday per year. Medieval peasants, some 1,000 years later, an estimated 100 to 150 days of holiday per year. Even in ancient Egypt, where it's actually not too cold to farm in the winter, there was a 4-month season known as Akhet, when the Nile River would flood and make farming impossible. This, by the way, no longer happens today, as the Aswan High Dam was completed in 1970 and now artificially prevents the Nile from flooding. It seems that even Mother Nature, through thousands of years of history, is telling us that this soulless 9-to-5 grind, 5 days a week, 50 weeks out of the year, is just not normal. So yeah, you've been lied to your whole life to believe a 9-to-5 career is normal, traditional, and just the way things are. As you can see now, for the overwhelming majority of human history, a 9-to-5 was anything but normal. When you discover how much you've been lied to, it's a bit infuriating at first. But this is a good thing, because it's the first step towards deprogramming yourself from the centuries of brainwashing used to enslave us. And it opens up a door for the possibility of a newer and better future. After all, if we existed and thrived for thousands of years before 9-to-5 jobs were invented, what's to say we couldn't do the same after they're gone? Hey guys, just wanted to say real quick, thank you guys so much for this incredibly rapidly growing community we're building here. I really appreciate all your support so much. If you're new here and enjoying this content, definitely consider subscribing for more epic takedowns of delusional boomer logic. Beyond the dogshit wages and terrible conditions we're all too familiar with today, there's one other major reason 9-to-5 jobs today just aren't worth it for Gen Z and millennials the way they were for our boomer and Gen X parents. And that is the issue of job security. Corporate loyalty is gone. Job security is non-existent. Companies treat you like worthless, disposable trash and will not hesitate to fire you the second they could save a single penny from doing so. But we all know this by now, so what's the solution? Well, in my experience, the only way to combat this corporate scumbag behavior is to give them a taste of their own medicine and beat them at their own game. You have to treat them as even more worthless and disposable than they treat you. So, how do you do this? Well, I believe it all begins by building individual skill sets rather than depending on a career. You'll soon see real-life examples of how young Zoomers are already figuring out how to do this in the next chapter. But let's first talk about why this is really the only way to go at this point. Since employers treat you like disposable trash, you have to treat them in the exact same way. We're pretty much stuck in a gig economy these days anyway, so might as well double down on it. Build an individual skill set and accumulate as many different streams of income as you can, so that if any one of them disposes of you, you have plenty of backup options to fall back on. Treat every one of your employers as disposable trash and be ready to ghost them the second it becomes advantageous for you to do so. Trust me, they would absolutely treat you the exact same way. The only disadvantage really of being an independent contractor or freelancer is the lack of stability, and if you're from America, getting health insurance benefits is really tricky. However, employers are doing everything they can to deny healthcare benefits anyways, and with how screwed the job market is, there is zero stability in a traditional 9-to-5 career anyways at this point. So there's really no advantage to being loyal to a company anymore, since they've completely gutted loyalty at this point. You must now become a total mercenary yourself and treat them as even more worthless and disposable than they treat you. This is just a necessary counter-adaptation we have to make in order to survive at this point. And at this point, this isn't just a hypothetical strategy anymore. This is something young Zoomers are already doing in this very community itself to evolve past this broken 9-to-5 hellscape. And they're starting to see some early signs of success. This is Odd King, a young 20-something-year-old guy from our very own Discord community. Like many of you, he got totally fed up with the typical nonsense we're all facing from the traditional 9-to-5 job market and these entitled snowflake employers, wanting 3 to 5 years experience for a minimum wage entry-level job, asking a million stupid, irrelevant job interview questions just to humiliate you. So after discovering our channel and our community, he was inspired to take matters into his own hands, and instead of pointlessly applying to all these jobs that aren't going to reply anyways, he began building his own income stream. He started simply mowing lawns for his neighbors and building as wide of a client base as possible rather than depending on one employer. He also started his own YouTube channel, which has amassed a very respectable 700 subscribers in his first few months, putting him very close to the 1,000 he needs for monetization. By the way, I've linked his channel in the description. Definitely follow him if you can. Let's help another one of us escape this broken 9-to-5 system. Although the money isn't great yet, it's not like a traditional 9-to-5 job would pay any better in this economy anyways. His goal is to eventually build another skill set such as walking dogs, for example, then perhaps be able to move abroad with his YouTube income stream. There's still a long ways to go, but he's off to a great start by realizing careers are BS, they're going extinct, and he's looking to evolve beyond it, as well as building up a wide client base so that he can treat his employers like disposable trash the same way employers treat you. Fair is fair. This goes both ways. Next up, we have Acid Suzanne, another commenter in one of my recent videos. A 22-year-old girl from the city who got fed up with the soulless corporate grind and decided to quit her corporate job after a few years of saving up to buy a very cheap plot of farmland in the countryside. Right now, she only has to spend 1 to 2 hours per day tending to her chickens and goats, which are very low maintenance animals. And with a few apple and fruit trees growing in the garden, this is essentially enough to sustain yourself without having to work a 9 to 5. After reading her comment, I decided to do some research as I was a bit surprised. I was always told that farm work was so brutal, and this is why we should be so grateful for our soulless cubicle jobs. And this is actually true, but with a major caveat. Yes, farm work does indeed involve many long hours of intense physical labor, but only because modern day farmers are forced to work for capitalist profits. If you're farming for yourself, however, it's a totally different story. According to Acid Suzanne, it's a simple 1 hour per day to take care of the chickens, about 30 minutes per day to milk the goats. They pump enough milk that she even has enough cheese to sell for some quick spare pocket change at the end of the day. She only has to work twice per month according to her, then she's free to do art or whatever other passions she has. This highlights another point I really want to emphasize here. We've talked a lot about establishing multiple streams of income in this video. One thing people always overlook, however, is that finding a way to significantly reduce your living expenses can count as one of them. Whether that's by moving abroad where the cost of living is cheaper, or in her case simply starting your own farm, being able to reduce your living expenses is just as, if not more valuable than making money at this point. Especially with this insane inflation we've all been dealing with the last 5 years or so. So it's still very early on in this seismic evolutionary shift away from traditional 9 to 5 jobs. There's undoubtedly going to be a challenging transition period as we're figuring all this stuff out. However, if there's any generation smart and courageous enough to evolve past this abusive, toxic 9 to 5 corporate hellscape, it's Gen Z. And as you can see, there are already some very promising stories emerging in our very own community, and hopefully after seeing this, you now have a better idea on how you yourself can evolve past the need for a 9 to 5 job that you never wanted to begin with.